Have you ever wondered how a song goes from a bedroom demo to a global hit? Or even how someone spots raw talent before the rest of the world catches on? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into on today's episode. My guest today is a true A&R heavyweight with over 40 years in the game. He's a man who helped bring acts like Jocelyn Brown, Run DMC and NWA from the US to the UK. And he's also the one behind signing Rag & Bone Man before Human took over the charts. We talk about what makes an artist stand out, how A&R has changed over the decades, and why gut instinct still matters in a data-driven world. Welcome to Beats Learning. Before we jump in, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves music or wants to break into the industry. Every follow helps us keep bringing in amazing guests like this one. But now that's done, it's a real pleasure to introduce Julian Palmer. Well, Julian, welcome to Beats Learning. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Ben. Very pleased to be here.
Okay. So look, I'll be honest, you have, and I'm going to use one of my favourite words here, an incredibly illustrious career spanning over the last 42 years.
Yeah, long, yeah.
Yeah, not to bring up your age in any way. But look, there's a lot I really want to cover with you today, because outside of some of the phenomenal names that you've signed, and obviously the wonderful labels that you've worked with, you know, it's just, there's a paramount of advice I've got no doubt you've got for the listeners out there. But what I really want to start with is where this passion comes from for you, because clearly looking over your career, you know, you've really built up something for yourself, and you've shown that you're dedicated to finding this new artist. But where did this begin for you? And I'm not talking about necessarily your first job. I'm talking, where does music come from? What defines it for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people might, in my particular role, which has always been A&R, it happens less now, but it used to be, when I was a young man, you had to justify why you were doing it. You know, are you a musician? Are you a songwriter? Are you a singer? Are you a DJ? Where did you come from? And my passion really came from being a kid in my bedroom, and at the age of 8, 9, and, you know, like everybody else, Top of the Pops was the thing. Yeah. And, you know, in the 70s when I was growing up, and, you know, from the early 70s to the beginning of the 80s, I think there were more cultural shifts and changes, and there was more excitement, more youth culture around music than at any other time, I think, in history. So I was very lucky to be a young kid and watching, I don't know, Slade on Top of the Pops and T-Rex on Top of the Pops, and being mesmerised by not only the music and how for that time how daring it was, but also how they looked.
Absolutely.
And everybody wanted to look like that, you know. And then punk came along, disco came along, and I was just kind of like every other kid, bombarded with these incredibly exciting changes and shifts in music. You know, Bowie at the beginning, no one had ever seen anything like it. So I was spoilt then, and, you know, I just used to collect records. As a young man, spent all my pocket money on them. And when I was slightly older, I was kind of a little bit mesmerised by, at the end of punk, when we used to go to gigs when we were perhaps a little bit too young, but we managed to get in. When electronic music came in, and it changed disco, and it also the tail end, I guess, new wave or post-punk, I really got quite interested in that electronic side. You know, Kraftwerk were the precursors, but that they call it now, I mean, it's that early electronic, early 80s stuff. At the time, it was new romantic.
Okay.
And that was also, you know, incredibly showy and very vibrant and very elitist and exclusive, and I loved all those things. You know, keep everybody else out. Only we know about it. So I started DJing. I had the records, so I started a few clubs of my own locally in Guildford, where I was living at the time. You know, with my mum and dad, and that kind of blossomed. I ended up getting a couple of gigs at some really quite significant clubs in Soho, like Billy's, and that was the you know, the pinnacle for me was getting into those clubs and showing what I could do. And I worked for a guy that ran Some Bizarre Records.
Okay.
And he had all like Soft Cell and Blancmange, and they used to play in Depeche Mode, and they used to play in this tiny little club in Soho, just in the middle of the dance floor. Crazy. So I got into that, you know, as I say, it was kind of quite an exclusive group and quite elitist, and you know, we thought we knew it all, and we certainly knew what was coming and the changes in music, certainly at that. I'm waffling a little bit.
Yeah,
you can cut that tiny bit out. And I think from there, you know, I DJ'd more and more. I was DJing at the WAG Club with Jay Strongman and Tim Simonon from Bomb the Bass. And I kind of figured that, you know, I wanted to make some changes. I wanted to take this knowledge that I had and bang on a few record company doors and see if I could get, you know, little old me in there to try and influence what they were doing. I knew about these artists and I wanted to find a way in so that I could, you know, make history. We just all wanted to make history, you know. When you're young, it's not about the money. It's about you want to go in and you people are doing it wrong. You're not putting out these records. The independents are getting it right, and you're just too slow and too late. But a lot of the other people that I kind of grew up with through that sort of, I guess, you know, funk became quite prevalent, and soul, rare soul became quite prevalent alongside all these other things. And the DJs, most of them went on to become superstar DJs. You know, at one point Pete Tong was involved, and we had Paul Oakenfold was involved, and Dave Durrell, you know, Nicky Holloway, all of those guys just went on to become superstar DJs, and I just thought there's going to be no money in that. There's no future in that. You know, you're just DJing in a club, and I got that completely wrong. I said, I want to go on the other side of the desk. I want to go in and try and influence, just do what I can do. And so I didn't get anywhere. I was answering adverts for jobs in the NME and Record Mirror and wherever you found them in those days.
You just knew the music
I just wanted to get in, and there was a job going in the accounts department at ATV Music, as it was then, and I think Michael Jackson had just bought it from Paul McCartney. And it was in Bruton Street, but for me it was a foot in the door. And it wasn't a creative job, and I got interviewed by the head of the accounts department, and he said, so you obviously understand bought ledger? And I'm like, well, of course I do. And again, you know, those were the days where there was no internet. You know, you could just kind of lie. And either your charisma got you through the door, or they saw right through you and said, no, you really don't. And they didn't test whether I could. I just managed to get this job. And I was still DJing in the clubs, you know, 3 or 4 nights a week. And that was quite hard, you know, because you finish at 3 a.m. I used to get the milk train home to Guildford. I'd get back about 4:30. Have to get up at 6 to get back into London. And eventually I was getting in later and later and later. And people were saying to me, you know, he's going to fire you in a minute. I mean, you just never hear, you know. And just as he was about to fire me, there was an advert in Record Mirror for a job at Island Records to do club promotion. And I thought, well, that's tailor-made for me. I'm in the clubs, you know, so I can promote to people like me across the country. And I went in and got the job. I met the head of A&R and the head of promotion because they weren't quite sure where the best role for me, but that was the only role available at that moment. And so I went armed with, I knew catalogue numbers of Grace Jones records. You know, I really did my homework, you know, because I loved Island Records, and I loved the lifestyle of it. And we all kind of grew up with those early Island Records releases. Not that we could play an awful lot of them, but from reggae to, you know, to Steve, the Spencer Davis group, and Free, and Grace Jones, and the Tom Tom Club. And so luckily I got the job, and it kind of blossomed from there, really. What I learned actually very recently from the guy that was head of promotions, Gary Blackburn, that gave me the job. He's now Norman Cook's manager and Pete Tong's manager. A really brilliant man. And only recently he said, well, Chris Blackwell said to me that you need to find someone that understands disco, because I've just signed Larry Levan and his Paradise Records label, which was all associated with Paradise Garage, the club in New York, which is, to me, one of the seminal clubs of all time. And Larry Levan, one of the most significant and influential DJs. And said, but you've got no one in the UK office that understands where this music should sit. So they thought I was that guy, luckily.
Amazing.
And he just was working on Gwen Guthrie's album. for Chris Blackwell. So that's how it kind of started. And Sly and Robbie were involved. And anyway, so that was my foot in the door, yeah.
Because if I'm not mistaken, obviously from that you was obviously working with Forth and Broadway as well, and that's when you went on to sign. I think one of your early signings was Jocelyn Brown, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well,
that's what a phenomenal sort of kind of entry that is.
Yeah, I mean, it was that's my first ever signing, and Forth and Broadway, it's the address of Island Records in New York. It was at the time. And it was a logo, something Chris Blackwell had come up with. He thought we'll put some of these records that weren't called dance records at the time.
Yeah.
They were sort of post-disco records. But Island Records is too established as one thing, and it doesn't really appeal to these kids on the street. And I kind of understood that philosophy. But so it was sitting there dormant. Nobody was running it. Anyway, so I was going into Groove Records all the time, or all the record stores in Soho, and getting one of the imports, or one each of the imports, the key ones that would come in almost on a daily basis.
Yeah,
it was me, and it was Pete Tong, and I think Pete Edge, and a few other people were running around town. And I went into Groove Records one day and said to this old lady, Jean, this 75-year-old lady that used to run Groove Records, and she just knew everything about soul and about disco and even about early hip hop and jazz funk, and so she was always the person I used to turn to and say, just play me, Jean, what you think is the key record or two from today. And she played, it was the first 20 seconds of somebody else's guy on an import. And I just fell in love, and I went, whatever you do, don't play this to Pete Tong. Don't play it. Just give me a date.
Yeah.
So I ran back to the office with it. And, I was 20, what was I? I was 86, I think. Maybe 86. Yeah, I was 22, 23. And I wasn't doing A&R. I was supposed to be promoting records to DJs.
Yeah.
So I ran back with it, went to A&R. The guy in A&R was on holiday. Went to the legal department. They were on holiday. So I went to this woman that used to be kind of Chris Blackwell's kind of PA in the London office. And I said, look, this record, it's a hit. I don't know how to sign it. And she said, well, just fucking go ahead and do it. She was like, get out of my office, just go and do it. So I thought, oh, well, that's a green light then, right?
Yeah.
So in those days, the imports all had the number of the label, the little independent label in New York or, Chicago or LA. So I just rang the number and said that I loved this record and I wanted to put it out in the UK and Europe, and I'll have our legal teams draw something up for you. Amazing. And I think it was about $7,500 to license it. Anyway, I thought, well, I managed to get it over the line. And then I thought, what's the worst that can happen? Then they'll come back from holiday and they'll fire me because you've just spent $7,500 and it's not your remit to do that.
Yeah.
You should be out doing your job. What are you doing? So I just thought, listen, I'm 23. I'll go back to DJing. They don't pay me much, but it sounds like a smash to me. So anyway, put it out, and it almost immediately captured the imagination, because it was the biggest disco record once disco had almost kind of died, if you like.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was a big club record. That would be a hit in my mind, but I didn't think it would, for 1 minute, end up on Radio 1, and we'd have to fly her in to do Top of the Pops, and it was, it's still one of the proudest moments of my life, because it was me taking a massive risk, doing a job I wasn't sanctioned to do, which was to spend their money on bringing something new in. Especially when they were on holiday, it looked like I was waiting for that moment, to do it behind the back. So anyway, it worked.
That's
and, made me incredibly proud. It got me a job. It was the reason I ended up running being involved with Forth and Broadway, because they said, well, you should be doing that. That's the job that you've shown us that that's what you can do. So you can put this on Forth and Broadway, and then you can work the label.
Amazing.
So it was a kind of double-edged sword, really, in a sense that it gave me a job in A&R when I didn't really know what A&R was. I just wanted this record, and I didn't want anybody else to have it.
I suppose in essence, though, that's not too far away from what A&R is, right?
And it's what you should, exactly, and it's how it should be and how it always ought to be. And you get it wrong so much more than you get it right.
Yeah, fair.
And you get it wrong now even more than you used to. Because there's so much stuff. There's 140,000 tracks a day on uploaded to Spotify. In those days, it was I was competing with maybe 2 or 3 other labels, and that was it, you know.
Yeah.
So, it was a great moment. I got a £50 bonus in a white envelope when it went top 10. So, and I was like, I called my mum and I went, Mum, I got a £50 bonus. So
amazing.
So, I was just happy that, I got it right with that move that could have gone horribly wrong. So...
Well, let's be fair, right? That sort of initiative to take the risk has really ended up defining your career, in essence, right?
Yeah.
And so how have things, and I don't want to kind of get too deep into this too quickly, but obviously over the past 42 years, in fact, actually, got to bring that question back. How would you, from that point, obviously you started doing A&R, how were you actually finding tracks? Obviously Jocelyn Brown's because you just stumbled across it, but actually going out, now you've got the role as an A&R for Island Records or Fall From Broadway, what would you do? How would you find music back then?
Well, everything was on vinyl, and because I was DJing in that kind of underground, and I was still, I didn't stop DJing because I thought, that's the thing. When people say, are you a musician, are you a singer? I'm like, well, no, I'm a DJ. So overnight, I was playing these records that nobody else really knew. And I was being a little more ruthless around my selections because my day job demanded that I find things that could cross over. And so, you know what it's like as a DJ, the reaction for records that are new, if people start filtering onto the floor and they don't come up to you and moan and say, can you play Madonna? Or, can you stop playing this shit? Luckily in the clubs we were in, that didn't happen, but I understand, you go outside that bubble and that's what happened. With new records, it was hard to break them, as it is now. And DJs could get slaughtered if they put a record on and the floor emptied. So I gauge it. I kind of had a sense of what people would like and what they'd get up and come onto the dance floor for, and I think that in itself, there are a lot of people that have that skill, but a lot of DJs that don't use it because they're too busy or too successful to have their own labels. But there's some DJs that do have their own labels, and there's a reason that a lot of those kind of DJ label things worked is because they've got that instinct and intuition, and also firsthand they can see if something's working or not. They can feel if something's going to work or not. So I used to get my vinyl from 3 or 4 select places, and so did the other people I competed with. But we all had a slightly different... Our tastes were slightly different. Our perspectives were slightly different. Mine was very much rooted in what would work for Chris Blackwell's Island Records. Ultimately, the umbrella that 4th and Broadway as an offshoot sat under. And I was so respectful to the culture of Island Records and what he'd built up that there were certain things that you just think, I like that, but it's just not right for us. And so I would go for things that had a little quirk to them or a little bit different. Or hip-hop, we got very quickly into hip-hop very early on because it was an extension of what Chris had been doing in reggae in the 60s and 70s.
Of course.
So it made a lot of sense, and he absolutely loved hip-hop, and he got very heavily involved himself, and he signed Delicious Vinyl in LA, did a big label deal with them. So, we had a lot of some of the best early American hip-hop because no one else was really looking at it.
Well, I was going to say, I know you signed Run DMC, NWA.
I mean, signed, we licensed. We signed them for the UK and Europe, and and that was, at the time it was exciting then as it still feels now. We had the King of Rock, and that was Aerosmith and Run DMC collaborating, and people were like just trying to get their heads around hip hop, and all of a sudden, they're bringing like hard rock into the mix. I've always loved hip hop and the original philosophies behind it, like the early De La Soul records and Tribe Called Quest records, where the sampling and where they would source was just so interesting and so off the wall and so not what you would expect. Grandmaster Flash used to do it, Double D and Steinsky would do it, and I was obsessed by those people that knew how to blend things that were, perhaps really at odds with each other, but they'd make them work. And Ireland was the perfect home for that kind of thinking, really.
So you kind of mentioned there a lot of like this international American sort of artists and then bringing them into UK and Europe. Well, how did you go about then finding ones that are a bit more perhaps homegrown, or was that not your sort of kind of area?
Yeah, UK rap took a little while, I think, to find its feet because everyone was so in awe of the creativity that was pouring out of America at the time, and it was changing so rapidly. The UK scene needed to find something that was, identifiably UK, and that took a little while. In the meantime, I was still in the record shops looking at the white labels that the UK labels the UK independent labels were putting out. And I heard this track, and it was like, it sounded really slowed down to me, and the rapper was rapping in Italian.
Okay.
And I said to the person behind the counter, I said, "What the hell's that?" I'm like, "It sounds like it's too slow as well." And they said it's a UK thing. I'm like, "Well, it's with an Italian rapper," and it was a 3-track EP, and it was the Stereo MCs. And
Well,
I'm
of
like,
course, yeah.
I'm like, wow, well, this is like nothing I've ever heard. And that's what the UK scene needed to do. And it began doing it at that time. Ultimately, it became, when Massive Attack came along as the Wild Bunch, all of that stuff sounded like, people said to me, I'd play it and they say, "You're playing it at the wrong speed." I'm like, no, this is the slowed down kind of beatsier thing was very identifiably British. And just as innovative and just as inventive as the American stuff. So I searched around for the Stereo MCs and found this guy called John Baker who had a label called G Street, and he is a legend, John Baker, and he used to be involved in the punk scene very definitely when the Pistols first started playing in Soho. And then, much like all of us, when that died down, what's the next most exciting thing that's going to blow him away? And and hip hop comes along, and everybody that liked punk kind of had to like hip hop. And it just felt like a natural progression. Once indie music had gotten stale, perhaps. So I just said to him, "Look, I love this band. Let's do a deal," and licensed it with him and helped make the record and A&R them, and we did a kind of direct deal with the band that was over a few albums. And I knew it would take a little while with them. The Americans kind of latched on quicker than we did here. And I know the Jungle Brothers were big fans.
Oh, mate, one of my favourite acts.
And supported the Jungle Brothers a couple of times early on in New York. And a lot of the American hip-hop stations used to play their early stuff, and it looked like things were moving, but took quite a while. Took 2 albums, I think, in the UK, which you wouldn't get these days. People would drop you after 3 or 4 tracks, maybe. But I wanted to keep it under the radar, and I knew Chris would love them eventually. And then during the release of the second album, there was a track that came out, and John Peel just went mad for it. And that was the turning point. And he put them on his stage at the Reading Festival, and they blew everybody away. And then we put out Connected, and immediately had a hit out the box. But it took, 2 albums and an awful lot of them touring, which hip-hop bands didn't do so much. They had a drummer, and it was very much a live thing with them, and we toured the world, and it took a while, but then it paid off. So
well, obviously looking at that then, because obviously Stereo MC is actually a great example of this, is actually sort of taking this act and really nurturing them to the point where a few albums in, they're finally getting the validation and the traction. From a record label's perspective and obviously an A&R perspective, what's going through your mind, and what are you sort of kind of thinking or trying to push during that period? You've got this belief in them, but you're kind of chasing your tail a little bit to make it happen. And exactly as you say, these days you'd be canned as quick as just drop to the a drop of a hat. How did it work back then? What did you have to do to kind of prove to the people that they actually give them time?
I loved it. One of the skills really, when you work for a company like Ireland, I worked for them at this point in time, they were independent. So, funded primarily by the success of U2 and, when U2 were going to release an album, and it was all kind of built around that because U2 were huge, obviously. Marley had died by that point, but it was the Marley catalogue and U2. And I loved that, the kind of living on the edge, not knowing whether the staff are going to get paid 1 month, whether the artists are going to get their royalties, and I loved that, the end of independence when Chris sold Ireland to Polygram. I think Branson had already sold up. And so he held out a long time, but it was quite an unstable period in time, unstable period in time. But again, being young and being excited by the music and, not having any kind of corporate pressure, made it fun. But the skill was knowing when to hide from Chris, really. And because he was in Jamaica or Nassau or wherever he might be at that time, as long as I kept the costs reasonable, I could develop them over the long term. But in those days, the way of developing an artist, you had to put an album out. You had to do the little tours, the little pubs, and you had to do them across Europe. You had to do them in America when you got the opportunity. And it's expensive now. It was just as expensive comparatively then, but you sold more. So niche things sold more. Reggae artists, a lot of the reggae artists that Chris had signed, Black Uhuru and Aswad eventually had hits, but for a long time they didn't. But they sold enough. There was enough of an audience to justify picking up the option and carrying on. So as long as we did it relatively cost effectively, the route to market then was you put a record out and you promote it. The way you promote it is by going out on the road and being live and being real and trying to attract an audience. And it's time consuming and it's expensive. And again, you have to roll the dice, you know. If you do all of this and it doesn't work, then your job's at stake as well as anything else.
Was there anything like you specifically? I know you mentioned a second ago you liked the music with the quirk, and obviously you had your genres that you took your fancy to. But was there anything maybe in the way that they were, their characters, their performance? As you mentioned earlier about the early punk and rock stuff. Their look, their aesthetic. Was there anything? Did you just look for the sort of the full package, or was there anything in particular you was looking for that, right, okay, if this is good, then I can work with the rest?
I think that's absolutely true. I wouldn't have signed them. I met them, and the frontman. I'm a big one for frontmen being stars, or I'm a big one for voices. If you've got a voice and it just doesn't sound like anybody else, and you're interesting enough and you're determined enough, then there's an opportunity to work with people that have that kind of talent. And Rob, who was the front man, the rapper for Stereo MCs, I mean, he just looked like a wiry punk. He looked so out of place fronting this band. And I felt, rhythmically, musically, they felt to me like The Clash, when The Clash discovered hip-hop, Magnificent Seven, and they went to New York and they worked with Fab Five Freddy and Futura 2000 and all of these incredible graffiti artists and rappers, the underground. A lot of people perhaps don't remember that The Clash kind of moved a little bit away from the mainstream rock side of things and became, embraced hip-hop more, earlier than pretty much anybody else. Perhaps about the time that Blondie did, similar thing. So I looked at them and thought, you remind me of The Clash when they were on the back of that truck at Notting Hill Carnival, and that's what it is. It's a kind of beatsy thing. It wasn't really but it was a little bit more than it just being, a microphone and two turntables. It was a drummer, and it was him with this kind of punk aura about him. And he just looked like he could carry it off, and he looked like a star. And so, it made it a lot easier. They looked like a real band,
Fair. So what was the gauge of success? Was it as obvious as tickets sold, records sold, or is there other elements you had to took into consideration?
I was less concerned about that side of it. I was just always monitoring. We used to get... I could see how the American, I think it was alternative radio in America, and we could see that it was moving very slightly. It was all about sales for me. You need to see the record moving, because ticket sales are one thing, but if people aren't backing it up by going out and buying the record, these days it's harder because everybody's got access to everything without having to make any effort whatsoever.
Absolutely,
So, that's a whole different set of issues. But I was only ever interested in having them cross over. And you have to see those, incremental changes each time you put a record out. It needs to be a little bit closer to the top 75 than the last one that got to 93, and I just needed to see that it was getting closer. And then they went into writing mode for the Connected album, and we sat and talked, and they could feel like I could feel that if they just applied a tiny little bit more of a commercial thought process into the writing, that it would happen.
Yeah.
And they went way beyond my expectations with it. We had 2 or 3 huge hits. They won 3 Brit Awards.
Yeah, of course.
And it felt overnight to everybody else, but this was the 3rd album. But we did sit and talk about it, and we did see that the opportunities were coming.
Yeah.
John Peel was, absolutely going overboard about them, but we needed John Peel's influence to get it on daytime Radio 1.
Yeah.
And they were never going to play it unless it had, those big choruses, those big hooks, which Connected came with,
So I don't want to jump about too much on this, but I want to kind of stick with how you were building and nurturing artists at that sort of kind of stage. 'Cause this was a bit of a golden era for both island records and hip hop, right? But it was you mentioned, you to market a new artist, new band, you've got to do the tours, you've got to get them on the radio. You've got, not only doing it for the UK, but you're doing it across Europe as well. Obviously, I know you've also had a career in the US, but when you're taking a band, and obviously, you mentioned it yourself, these days you've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got all the above to make it quite easily accessible to everyone out there and hit a very big market very quickly. Back then, how would you sort of kind of say, right, okay, I want to go, for argument's sake, into the German market, or even just keep it with the UK market? How would you approach launching and releasing an artist back then?
Probably slightly sidetracking from. I'll get to that, but I think
Please do.
With the Stereo MCs, it was so important for me. I look at A&R 2 different ways, really. You sign a band like that are very self-sufficient. One of the jobs that an A&R man has is to find the right songwriters, to find the right producers, to find the right mix engineers. And with them, maybe the mix engineer was one of the few things that I would get involved in. But to me, it's all about them being real, them developing themselves, them finding themselves. And the only way the songs are going to come is through them getting better as songwriters. Because the last thing I would ever want to do is throw something into the mix that's not authentic.
That's fair.
So that can take time. Sometimes it can happen overnight.
Yeah.
But you have to nurture it, and you have to give them the space that they need. And a lot of it comes through playing in different territories. So the other side of the coin is you sign a singer, like I signed Misha Paris in the 80s. She was young, 16, signed her out of gospel, gospel choir, Pentecostal church. Just about the most incredible voice I'd ever heard. And she was happy to work with me, singing songs from songwriters I'd found at a publishing company. And I was kind of sitting on these songs and waiting to find a singer that could do them justice. And so there's that side of it where, you're incredibly involved in helping shape the artist's career.
Absolutely.
Once they've had success, then, of course, she went from being young and inexperienced to having a lot of success and having a voice and being able to be involved in the writing sessions. Amazing. But that takes a little minute.
Of course.
My priority is to get her on, get her successful so that she buys herself, the opportunity to have a career.
Absolutely.
And that's true with any singer that I might work with that relies on other people to help them write songs. But with bands or with artists that are, singer-songwriters, you have to allow them space and time to find themselves. Because if you throw someone in the mix, they're no longer, truly a singer-songwriter. They're another singer that can write songs, but it's not that self-sufficient kind of thing that I know I look at in singer-songwriters, and so do a lot of other people.
So obviously with that then, I'm coming back to your point earlier about how that element of it's changed and how people are dropped, there and then, a click of a fingers. Do you think, what's your, maybe to rephrase the question, what's your thoughts on the potential lost artists that we might have had they been nurtured and given the time of day like you did back in the day?
That's a good question. It's very, very difficult now for record companies. I mean, I'm leaving Columbia, who I've been with for 12 years. It was such a huge part of my life. Absolutely. Moving on to pastures green that I'll talk about later. But just as I was leaving, Jamie Spinks over there, who's a really great young A&R man I've got a lot of respect for, signed an artist from pretty much nowhere. It's just an example of how difficult it is these days. Took the deal off the table, which is, a record company, will offer you this, just don't shop it around. I mean, pretty much before she'd started doing, building up the online persona, building up the community on social media, the things that the record companies really look for, that you have to really have some wild traction before record companies are going to get interested in you. You have to kind of almost have a hit.
Yeah.
And they didn't, they didn't look for those things. She didn't have those things, but she did have an incredible voice and great talent and a really clear vision. And I know he got in deep with her and, got in deep with sitting with her about helping her shape the posts that she puts out, the clips that she might use from certain parts of the track, all of these things that can draw apathetic, social media swipers in. And, I'm seeing it now after I've not been there for a while and they're having a hit with her. Which is remarkable. That's really incredible A&R because it's very, very difficult for anybody to have success.
Absolutely.
It took Lola Young 6 years from signing to Ireland to having the hit that she's got right now.
Wow.
And I think that when you look at the charts and you study the charts are pretty immovable. Stuff sticks around for a long time. Very little of the UK signed artists that require traditional A&R break through, or if they do, it takes a long time. And so what Columbia are achieving right now with Sky Newman is it makes them a bit of an outlier, and I would think pretty attractive to any young artist that looks at record companies and might think, well, they might misrepresent me, they might just over A&R me, all of the things that people do fear. And also when lawyers say, well, you don't really want to be signing yet, certainly not to them because they don't have a track record of doing it, which is true of almost every label right now. You could say, with the exception of Ireland with Lola Young, and now Sky Newman has very much put Columbia. But it's even more impressive, I think, with Sky Newman because they literally weren't waiting for her to build it herself. So that's really great A&R in the contemporary sense. And the contemporary sense is incredibly difficult, certainly for an old man like me. All the things that I know and all the things that I understand are not necessarily true anymore. And the thing about it is that, you can get 2 or 3 track releases maybe, and record companies make a decision. Is it worth us pouring huge amounts of money in here? Or do we see each time we put the record out, which is a bit similar to how it was with me, but they're not given 3 albums, they're given 3 single releases. And it's very difficult. The landscape's changed as much as we're bombarded with music. Also, kids don't really, the generation that's coming up don't have a loyalty to artists. They share tracks, and tracks can become huge overnight. So we've got to remember that it's not necessarily the fault of record companies or the fault of anybody in particular. It's the fact that things change.
Absolutely.
And music's become, a part of what these kids do. We didn't have video games. We didn't have social media. We didn't have distractions of any kind. Even the film industry in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't very sexy. People just wanted music.
Of course,
But now you're bombarded. There's so much. It's so difficult to get heard, really, at the moment.
Well, it's funny enough, this is something that I've discussed on the podcast with a couple of other guests, is like trying to make yourself known in the noise. Like even taking away the, outside of music distractions, like your video games, like your TV, blah, blah, blah. Even just the way that how accessible music is. As you say, like back in the day, if you know this artist, you follow that artist because, let's be honest, you might not necessarily be aware of all the others that are in the marketplace or in the landscape. But you go on Spotify now, you can hear anyone you want.
Yep.
And I think that naturally just forces people to divide their time across it. So the concept of the super fan is, the actual market is getting incredibly small for each independent artist. Obviously, we'll come on to sort of kind of how to navigate that landscape in a second, but how have you had to adapt? And you said obviously you've had to change a lot. How have you had to adapt to this? And not to sort of answer your question for you, I don't want to drag this out, but back in the day you would have a few artists that you would nurture, you would coach, you'd take through to the point of success. You've got this journey with them, whereas now it's in and out, in and out, in and out, from the sounds of it anyway. What have you had to do to sort of kind of make sure that you're at the front running still?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question because I was just thinking as you were finishing the question there that we could certainly back in the early days at Ireland, and Ireland always had this mystique about it that I used to play. I say I was always so respectful of the lifestyle aspect of it, the image and everything about it. Everybody looked up to. I knew that, and so we had a kind of head start. And you have to have great marketing people, great promo people, the best salespeople. I mean, in those days, I mean, you know that, right? I mean, the best, and you could kind of almost plot a campaign. You'd get to the point where you think we might need another week, we might need another 2 weeks, where you could hold the release back, where you've got, our price of putting an order for this. So you could kind of, one, monitor it, two, you could take steps to, either accelerate the release or in most cases, you'd hold it back until you get that optimum week one position.
Absolutely.
I mean, you do all of this sometimes and there's absolutely zero interest, but you know that and you back off. And that's because there were no outside distractions. We controlled when the record was sent to the record stores. We controlled when it was sent to the radio stations. Nobody else, right? So we were in control. I think the problem now is the control is no longer with the record companies. That maybe happened, through Napster. Who knows when illegal file sharing technology dictated that because now people can make tracks on their phones. Everybody can do anything and everybody's got access to everything. So I'm finding when I talk to my son and a lot of his mates that when you ask them what do they like, back in my day, you either liked one thing or you just didn't really like music. You were either really into the new thing that was coming along. But now there are so many, I don't know, the drum and bass thing, the resurgence of old school hip hop, the resurgence of deep house, all the things that have been around before. There are people making those records or recreating them, but there are different pockets now. Some kids like, hard rock and emo and punk, but it's so fractured that it's difficult to see how there aren't really. That's what I'm trying to say is there isn't really a scene or a movement that you can tap into that's big enough for any one of those particular things. And it is all so quick and so transient, so momentary. These 20-second clips on TikTok will either survive or they won't. But that's all it really needs for people to latch onto it. But again, you're bang and it's gone. You're almost like a heritage artist the next day. It's mad. So
a bit of a random question, and hopefully something you can answer pretty easily. On average, how many artists would you have signed per year back when you first started in comparison to now?
I think the similarities between now and then, we used to license these American, either hip hop or disco or soul or reggae records. Sometimes, I mean, we would license those records, kind of knowing that they would sort of keep the lights on. While we were developing the UK artists that that were going literally from scratch. Because in those days, it would be a feather in your cap as an A&R man to find something that nobody else had heard.
Of course.
So I'd talk to Pete Tong and say, well, where'd you find that then? I'm like, you were kind of in awe of people that found something that nobody else knew about. It couldn't be any more different now. Yeah.
Well, coming on, that's perfect answer, but perfect time to ask this question. How do you find people now, and how has that changed over the years?
The A&R meetings that I'm familiar with, and you have, 2 or 3, and they're quite heavily 1 or 2 of them, not all of them, because you, as an A&R person, you've got to have the instinct and intuition to know when to go for something before it looks like a stone cold cert. Yeah. The stone cold cert thing is the analogy that I gave, that is the old school import records from the 80s and 90s that we would license before, hopefully quicker than the next label. That would be the reason that you could do this stuff. So, it's the same, but it's not, because there's so much stuff and it's so hard to monitor it. But data, tracking the data, it's a very clever young A&R people that absolutely have it all at their fingertips and have all the programs and understand where to look and understand when to back off and when to pull the trigger on doing a deal with something.
obviously taking data into consideration, then, because obviously, like, you know, from a naive perspective, and certainly from the outside looking in anyway, back in the day it was right. Do I love this track?
Yeah.
Has it got me? Do I see talent? Do I see this? Whereas now, and obviously once again, this might be naive, so please correct me if I'm wrong, because of things like social media and how easily accessible data is, as you say, do you find that data can also lead you down the wrong path and actually bite you in the bottom a little bit and be like, right, okay, well, look, this guy's got a huge, the person's got a huge following, but actually when it comes to properly releasing a track, like, nobody gives a fuck. Like, how often does something like that happen? A better question perhaps, how important for artists out there is social media for someone like you to recognise them?
I mean, I think it's really important that artists, the route to market is social media. And if they're not on social media, then it's going to be very hard to see how anything is going to necessarily move with them, because we're not the only people that look at it. You know, the data is freely available to radio stations, freely available to DSPs.
Yeah.
You know, they could then come to you and say, well, you've taken a complete punt on this and we're not seeing the data, you know, so it's you know, it's a vicious circle really.
It really is, yeah.
But I mean, you know, great talent will out at the end of the day. You know, an incredible song will find its way to the. I used to believe that. It's harder to believe that now, when in 3 days' time there'll be another 500,000 tracks out there. I get that, but you know, the best A&R people are the ones that of the younger breed that, you know, I can see how they operate, and it's incredibly stressful because the pressure from above is to have a hit.
Yeah.
Kind of at any cost, really. I mean, it's to have a hit, you know. In the days at Ireland, it would be, is it appropriate to the label? But now I think everything's kind of, kids don't really think, oh, it's Columbia, it's Ireland, it's Virgin. They don't think like that anymore. Yeah. So record companies ought not to either. So I think it's that understanding of how important it is for these artists to build a community, and I think most importantly, it's for them to have these kids singing every word of every song before they put a record out through a record. That kind of thing is important. It's the old-fashioned doing the toilet tour for 2 years. That's what it is. It's the route to market, and so you need them to build a community because you can't do that for them. Much like back in the day, I couldn't stand up on stage and pretend to be Misha Paris. Clearly, I couldn't. So you can't do that side of it. We can't be the artist. And I used to say that to some of the artists, that when the world changed and, you know, some of the artists that have been signed prior to everything moving completely onto social media, they'd be like, well, I didn't sign up for this, so I'm not going to start going on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Well, I didn't sign up for it either. I'm just passing on to you how times have changed. And you're not going to go on a 36-date, you know, pub tour and expect that to work. It doesn't work anymore. So it's the ones that are wise enough to modernise their approach a little and embrace that this is the future right here, right now. This is the way to do it, to compete. And the ones that you look at, first and foremost, you have to be moved by them. There has to be something within you.
It's still about the talent, at least.
Because you do get it wrong when you think that this is something. Listen, I've always got it wrong when I've either tried to sign somebody or some weird, you know, fluke that I've actually managed to sign them when I'm clearly being, you know, less than genuine. It always goes wrong.
Yeah, fair.
It always goes wrong. I can't think of anybody that signed one of these things. I mean, there have been moments, you know. Well, Miles Smith's a good example. That's another huge success, a massive success. Somebody that's actually got a career. Very few of them do, and it's, you know, it's another Sony one, but there's very few out there. He's there, lowly young, you know, but he came pretty fully formed. You know, he kind of knew who he was, and he really built, and so he's got great A&R to help him sustain that. The other side of the coin is you know, what Columbia are doing with Sky Newman, which is taking her kind of rawness and helping her to build that from scratch, and now having a hit perhaps sooner than everybody thought that she might. So the bravery, both sides have worked, and both sides, Sony, are very clearly market leaders in at the moment.
So, like, just coming back on that then, and I don't want to dwell too much on this because obviously social media is one of those. It is, let's be honest, it's a necessary evil no matter what. But let's say, for example, because let's also be quite frank, you know, if you are an introvert, music is your thing, you've spent, you know, your childhood, your teens, you know, mastering your craft, you're incredibly talented, but you do not like social media, you haven't cracked the algorithms, or whatever it might be. Where do they stand? Have they got no chance?
No, I don't believe that's true at all. I mean, I believe that, you know, obviously everybody needs a great manager. I mean, those that doesn't necessarily happen a lot. But the artists that do this know it's not a coincidence that the ones that do break big usually have the sharpest young management around them, and they would identify. Well, it would be easy enough if you've got an artist that you're absolutely blown away by. There's always space for everything and anything. You know, some of the greatest music ever made doesn't come with all the things that I grew up talking about. It's kind of faceless, really, and genreless even. As long as they've got something about them which is really identifiably them, and it's not just kind of background. If there's something that they can latch onto, then you know you've got digital marketing teams that you can bring in to help you come up with a clever, you know, the way no one's ever seen what Daft Punk looked like. You know, there's got to be something.
The gimmick, right? It's the gimmick.
Either a gimmick or just a way of doing it where, because of course not everybody can look into a camera and say, you know, I'm going to sing an a cappella of, you know, the middle eight from my new song, Please Love It. You know, the older artists that we try and encourage to do that find it really difficult. You know, they do it with their heads to the camera. You know, and I understand that. That part of it they didn't sign up for. They do like being on stage and in front of an audience, but that's different. That's a real thing that they're feeling. You know, this is kind of impersonal, looking in a camera and hoping that, you know, you don't get loads of really nasty comments, and you know, they've got to deal with all of that.
Which is one of the real horrible things of today, isn't it? It's just like you have to put yourself out there. You have to kind of, whether you like it or not, in many ways, as you say. But then all you're doing is, in many ways, opening yourself up for just.
It's so easy for people like me or the people that I work with just to say, you've just got to you've just got to not look at it. Don't look at your social. And you know, because that's what else can you say?
Absolutely.
You know, the management are really good at. The good management are really good at kind of shielding them or helping them through, or helping them understand, or eventually, you know, if you build up this community that everybody wants the artist to build up, they get drowned out by the community. You'll be, you know, the community jump in then, right? If people are really like Charlie XCX, you jump on a Charlie XCX post and be, you know, in any way detrimental or nasty, they're going to deal with you, right? So she can have the, you know, the satisfaction of seeing other people do that. It's only early on when everybody can kind of look like they're against you. Once you build a community and have these WhatsApp groups and you've got people kind of, you know, acting as your agent across, firstly across, you know, counties in the UK, and then stretching into Europe, wherever it might be, because it's a global reach. So you just have to ride out the early part of it, and then you'll end up with the positivity drowning everything else out.
So how's obviously this accessibility then? And as you say, you know, one of your comments just there was like the fans in essence kind of doing the marketing for you in many ways. Has that made it easier in some ways at launching, or at the same time has it made it harder because you've got to win the fans in the first place? You know, what's your take on that? Yeah,
I mean, you've got to rely wholly on the artist to... it's difficult because it's chicken and egg. You know, like I said, back in the 80s and 90s, we controlled to a point where if we felt we needed another couple of weeks on a release, we'd pull it back. Now, if you haven't got music out there, what is it that the artist is trying to build up? So you kind of have to release tracks, how many you release or how far you go into it, and all of it's open to debate. You know, there are, listen, it depends how committed the label are, how you can keep it cost effective as ever, because putting tracks out is not a cheap thing to do. We can't just put it out into a void, you have to work it.
Absolutely.
and there has to be a reason to do it, because also, it can end up being a negative thing if you just keep throwing tracks out there. These kids are kind of savvy. They're going to look at it and say, well, you're just trying to squeeze this person into an area, and we don't believe that sound. It could be an artist that's interested in lots of different styles of music. If you put them all out, it looks like you're trying to hedge your bets.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one. It has to come from the artist, and it kind of has to be fairly raw, and it kind of has to be not the big produced up record company release, because you can't be doing that. You can't just be putting things online without the songwriter's permission, without the producer's permission. So all of these things to consider. So artists, but they need to find their way online, and they need to find their way on social media, and they need music to do that. So.
Okay, so coming back to the artist then, and obviously we kind of covered a lot of the old school nurturing to these days, so already coming to you with a bit of a ready to go package. For an artist that perhaps has tried putting themselves out on a limb, posted their demos to a label and all that sort of thing, and perhaps the initial thing, and maybe they got signed and released, but it didn't quite take off. But from that point, the label's then just gone, sorry, it's not for us, that's it. What would your advice be to them to sort of kind of to keep going, to learn better, to improve on what they're doing, and then hopefully when they do it again, it'll be a bit more successful? Do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, much like the analogy of finding an artist that no one had ever heard before being a bit of a feather in your cap back in the 80s and 90s, and now it's quite the opposite. Chapel Roan got dropped, and the record that she made that had a success with, they gave it back to her. And it was Ireland gave it back to her. There are countless examples of artists that are... So I don't think that there's any stigma involved anymore. I think people know, you do 2 or 3 tracks with a label. You may even do an album with a label, if you get that far. I mean, very few people do, but it doesn't work for myriad of different reasons. Somebody might have left that was heavily involved and integral within the company. People lost interest in the artist. I don't know. There's so many different reasons why, the relationship doesn't work out, maybe. Or they could go hell for leather and it just wasn't your time. You could maybe be ahead of the curve. You don't know. Maybe the thing that you've done becomes the thing that once you've been dropped, everybody's going, wow, we need a bit of vaudeville now. We need a bit of like this now. And it just wasn't right at the time. So just... if you feel, listen, if you've got a deal in the first place, there must be something about you.
Yeah, fair.
And there's a reason that you got a deal. And I know some people that have had 4, 5, 6 deals and it's never quite worked out.
Really?
But that's 4, 5 or 6 different companies that have seen something.
They're all learning curves as well, right?
They're all learning
Feedback,
curves. It's just very, very difficult to cut through now. It's always been a very difficult industry, but... the feeling that heritage artists, become... It used to be that you'd need to kind of ride out a decade, or, you just got too old. You're obviously no longer straight... we call it straight to Radio 2 rather than Radio 1 putting you on the...
I like that.
That kind of thing. But now, the world moves so quickly and people are so quick to move from one thing to another, that you can become, a little adult a little too quickly. So, I just say stick with it, because there's a big world out there.
Keep pushing.
People find their music from all sorts of different places. The sync world is, one of my friends is one of the key music supervisors here, and I always look at him and just think, you're doing the Bridget Jones. Can I just not let's go and I'll play you this, I'll play you that. That's the thing, really, is that you get the right sync in the right place. They're the things that can be gold dust, because it's very difficult to, you're not going to get on the Radio 1 playlist unless you've got these things that Radio 1 know about, that we know about. If you're going back to basics and the traditional way to do it, that still exists out there. It's just that the markets are so much smaller.
Of course. But
you can still do it. There's still radio stations that play stuff that they're not playing it because it's trending. They're playing it because it's great,
Yeah. Well, coming to then sort of how, obviously we've spoke about how you would go and find music. Let's take an artist in a scenario like I've just said, and what they're trying to do is actually push their music and ignoring the social media, but actually getting it in front of labels. Now, I know a lot of the independent sort of labels are using products like, or software or platforms, should I say, like Label Radar, which is absolutely fantastic. But let's say someone did want to approach Columbia. Or and I won't actually mention the next place until later, but look, you've worked at some phenomenal institutions, right? How would you want to be approached by someone who wants you to listen to their music?
A lot of the way that I've found artists has been through friends tipping me off about a mate that they knew. You know, I mean, I hate that when families come to you. Oh, you know, I really hate that, because it means you're responsible to give them such a detailed breakdown when the reality is that they shouldn't really be doing it. Isn't there something else they can do? But you're in the music business. You owe me, a war and peace on what it is that my son needs to do with this band, and really they ought to just disband. But you've got to go. You've got to jump through the hoops. I mean, I trust certain people that I know and I've known for a long time, and they don't have to be people even necessarily on the front line of the industry. Just people that know their music. I would say that if you're really that good, the first place you need to go to is a manager.
Okay.
A manager, because managers, like lawyer, there are certain lawyers, lawyer even, there are certain lawyers, but certainly managers that can help shape the artist, but also the ones that are going to get the eyes and ears of the label people. If an established or a reasonably well-known or reasonably an established or trusted and respected manager is always the door's always open for them, and they bring a new artist in, they're going to be listened to. Yeah. Because they've either got, skin in the game, or they've had, broke something in the past.
They've got a reputation that
they've got a reputation.
Time, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. That you're, as a young artist, even if you find somebody that's going to give you half an hour of their time, they're probably not taking the notice of you that they should. It's just, the way to approach people. I always say now, the record companies will find you if you're good enough. The record companies will find you. Okay. Used to be the other way around. Yeah. But we, try and analyse as much of the stuff that's out there. And believe me, sitting in Columbia for as long as I have, they try and listen to as much of the great stuff that's out there that's just beginning to bubble, but not enough for you to go, well, let's sign it, but just so that you're aware of it. Yeah. So we will, I say the record companies will find you if you're good enough. But if you want to, my advice would be to get a good manager. Fair. Because your talent will be recognised by them, and they can help nurture you. And when the time's right, you should sit in front of a record company. Now it can be the wrong move for you to sign too soon. You need to find yourself. I used to help artists find themselves, but you don't have the luxury of time anymore. You're under the spotlight. Of course, your second single doesn't work, and usually your second single is a compromise. You sat in a room with, you got marketing and promotion and A&R, you got the label, and everyone's going, we need to do that. You need to kind of find a way that you circumnavigate that potentially happening, and that is by staying away from a major label and either going to a label services place or let the manager advise you how you do that. But you can build up your profile online and wait your moment. Yeah.
So is there, like you mentioned, obviously the concept of, like, realistically, if you're good enough, the label will find you, right? And obviously, I know a lot of the manager. I absolutely love that advice, and I think that's probably one of the first times I've heard that on the podcast so far. But obviously, some people don't like that. Some people do want to go the independent way. I say independent, still want to be released on a label. If they wanted to, let's say, have their music somewhere where a label is listening, like, for example, where would you be going to right now to listen to potential new music?
I mean, I'm close with Ian Dutt, who runs the Orchard, and I'm that model really impresses me. I mean, that the huge amount of music coming out of there, but they remind me that the independent sector and the label services models remind me of the way it was when I first started, because they're basically doing things wholly for the love.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not, they're not looking at, they're looking at things that record companies can't work. So there's still, a lot of substance in there, or things that the artist just simply doesn't want to be on a major label. Whether it's Little Sims or whether it's Ray, or whether I don't know, some of the bands that just know that frontline record companies are not for them. But the success, they know what they're doing and they get the team around them. So that is, to me, label services, you have to have a manager, you have to have something around you. But if you're a singer-songwriter, for instance, you don't need any money, you don't need to be in the studio, you can be singing your songs to video, and if you're young, that will be second nature to you anyway. And singer-songwriters, that's all they need to do to show what they're capable of and where they can go. And label services in conjunction, with them needing to see what we need to see. If you're not going to go on social media, then there's nothing anyone can really do. That's the route to market. So label services need that like we need it. They're just not driven by it like major labels are.
Yeah, fair. Well, I'm gonna jump ahead a bit, because obviously I don't want to. I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah.
Right, jumping ahead to the 2010s, and I'm gonna start. I know you've mentioned a lot of names and some phenomenal names, but I don't know whether you would consider this a highlight of your career. I don't know, but Rag and Bone Man. Like, I think, what a phenomenal signing that was for you, right? Obviously, that I know you were first hand at that, and things like, for example, I think his first album was the fastest selling in the 2010s for a UK male artist.
Yeah.
And it's like, what a phenomenal experience. From my understanding, I think there's a bit of a story behind this as well, because weren't you trying to get him for like 18 months or something?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's the highlight of my career, and it's that thing where all the stars align, and it wasn't simple and straightforward. But when it suddenly clicked, it was like literally like, Christ, if Carlsberg could do campaigns, it would just be like. It was phenomenal. It was hard. I've never seen anything quite like it that in my career. But it was like I said earlier. I was on holiday in Italy, and I wasn't really listening to music. And a mate of mine sent me a SoundCloud link and said, "This mate of mine's produced this, and he used to go to school with him from the age of 5. You've got to listen to this bloke's voice. You're going to absolutely love him. It's right up your street." And he must have caught me on it in a good moment, because I thought I never would normally do that.
Yeah.
And I looked at my missus and I said, "Oh my God, you've got to listen to this voice."
Amazing.
And he was doing his kind of blues, his hip hop stuff, and I mean, I think like everybody else, I like to think that I'm a member of the public's been given an opportunity to actually exercise my taste. That's what an A&R person is. My mum's an A&R person. Everybody's an A&R person. Everyone's got an opinion. And I just thought this was the first time I'd heard something for a long time that made me feel like a kid again.
Amazing.
And believe me, I'm not a kid. And I just was like, shit, this is everything that when I first heard Aretha, or I first heard I'm putting him in very high, but I mean with voices. And I immediately knew. And then when I got back, I went to meet him in their little studio in Battersea. And he's from Brighton, so he used to come up from Brighton all the time. And then I met him for the first time, and he just looks. I mean, like he doesn't look like he sounds, or maybe he does look like he sounds, or maybe he just is larger than life.
Yeah.
And a few people said to me from the American perspective, when I first signed him, said his name, what does his name mean? And he just looks like a bouncer or a Hell's Angel, and it won't work in America. That won't work. But now you've got these huge stars, all of a sudden a tattoo in their faces, and he was the first to do that. And they were right. It took a minute for things to really click in America. Not really an artist in America, but he is pretty much everywhere else. Human was a big single release, but
massive. Yeah. Well, the album itself was, as I say, was I think in the 2010s the fastest selling album, or the
fastest selling debut.
Fastest selling debut album for a UK male artist.
Solo artist. I think
exactly.
something like that. I mean, that might. I mean, that I don't think it was beaten after it was 2017. But yeah, I mean, I just thought I'd never heard anything quite like it, and the demos were incredible. I mean, his voice, he could sing the cliche, he could sing the phone book, and I used to say to songwriters, I used to put him in sessions, and I'm like, you've just got to stop going, oh my God, when he opens his mouth, because I want a great song.
Yeah.
And we know that he can sing and everything sounds great, but we need a great song.
Yeah.
So it took actually really experienced songwriters really to understand how to get that from him in the end. But yeah, I mean, I chased him. He just wanted to put out an independent record, which he was going to do anyway, like an EP that we ended up putting out called Wolves. They wanted to keep record companies away. They did a publishing deal first with Phil Christie at Warner Chappell. And then I started getting nervous because they're a publishing deal, so they had a little bit of time and a little bit of a buffer financially. And everybody was people were coming out of the woodwork, you know.
Yeah.
So he's really tight with Dan Smith, and Dan Smith was 1/3 of the production company that had signed him to do this. So all things being considered, I got as close to him as I could possibly get, and knowing that the wolves were surrounding us and him. But I'd got so close with him that he and I were talking about things that weren't even really music anymore because he was a carer for disabled kids when I met him.
Oh wow!
And it meant everything to him. He actually talked to me about he was a bit worried about doing a deal because he'd have to leave doing this job and move up to London.
Oh, beautiful guy.
And he's the most beautiful, genuine, just so real. But I'm getting all of this heat on the other side. People are like, God, you've got the heads of every label. I mean, the heads of the heads, the very senior, I'm not going to mention names, but the very last the last unsigned gig that we went to, and I took our chairman was like, you're not going to sign him. I mean, look around the room. I mean, it was like one of Shoreditch, I can't remember where it was now, but, and I said, well, I can't be any closer with him, we've just got this bond, and I think he understands me and I understand him, and all I can do is hope that he's not swayed by money, because my take on it is that he wants to write home, and I think that he needed to know that Columbia was the right home. And Stacey Tang, who was the general manager, was the head of marketing at the time, and she was a huge part in it as well. She's incredible. She runs RCA now. And she and I just kind of went there with him and made him feel rightly that Columbia was going to be the right home for him, and that he'd be looked after. And luckily he wasn't swayed by, you write your own check, meetings that he had with people when it got to that point. So we signed him, and then the hard work began. And it was thanks to Germany and Switzerland and then Scandinavia. It just was a huge record out of nowhere on Swiss radio, because he went and did the Montreux Festival. Yeah. And they added Human, and I was getting the international team coming to me, oh my God, you're number 5 in Switzerland. And I'm like, what? I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But I suppose it's all relative, and it's better to be number 5 in Switzerland than not. But I just said that to myself, and anybody said, what the hell's going on with Rag and Bone? And I'm number 5 in Switzerland, I'm going to use it the way they used it on me.
Amazing.
They'll be like, what does that even mean? And what it meant was, Switzerland's a very influential market in radio. Because you surround Italy, Germany. It filtered into Germany.
Makes sense.
And then it became the biggest. I mean, it's such a German radio thing, really. The voice and the chain gang sound and the look. And I hope he's not watching this. But he knows what I mean. And they went overboard. And the German company were like, multi-platinum. And he did a tour quite early on in Germany. It was at Hamburg or Cologne, I can't remember where. And I went out with him. And we went out the back for a cigarette. And it was rammed and people going nuts. And we were outside, there was like a fence at the end of the outdoor bit. And there were screaming girls. And I'm like, this is like, I don't know, it's like, it's like,
stardom.
Like, take that, or, And it was honestly, and that happened so quickly through Europe, and it spread the whole of Europe. And then Australia, and then pretty much everywhere. And America, it didn't really quite cross. But like I said, the guy that said to me that might be a concern, you can't put him in a box. Because that's the thing that I like, that you can't put people in a box. Because then it means you're kind of ahead of something. Okay. But sometimes you don't benefit from completely. He should be a big star in America, but they barely know him. And Human was, it's a huge sync track. But... so not that I don't think he really cares. He's just as successful as he wants to be. He's making the music he wants to make, and if he really wants it, the world is his. If he really wants, whatever he wants to do, he can do. And he's got to the point where, obviously a lot of artists would die to get to that point. But when you do, you can either chase it and hope that you can keep having that success. Or you can use it as an opportunity just to do what you want to do. Depends how ambitious you are.
Yeah, I've got so many questions off the back of that, and obviously related to a number of different things. Well, first and foremost, how does it make you feel? Like, seeing you've taken this really lovely guy who's looking after disabled children, of all things. You couldn't get any more like, look at me, I'm a golden child. And then, you've taken him out of his comfort zone, you've put him in front of an audience, you've now got him, massive across Europe, the UK, and then suddenly, as you say, you're at this concert in Germany, and a crowd and girls and everyone's going absolutely wild for him. For yourself, that's kind of helped create this. How does that make you feel?
I just it's one of those things that happens very rarely. I've been doing my job a long time. I had quite a bit of success. Tricky was pretty successful. Stereo MCs,
of course,
but nothing. That was kind of stuff that came and went, and we had our moments, and it kept me in my job. And it was more than anything, it was kind of the success I had was appropriate to the company I was working for. And that made me feel proud, because Chris Blackwell was proud and we were doing the right job. And as long as, I've got to justify somebody paying me as much as if somebody's driving a train and, all of a sudden they can't drive the train, then, they would expect that they might be in a little bit of bother. And, so I've lived my life knowing that you're one release away from the sack, or you're only ever as good as your last hit, and that might be a while ago. And so an A&R man lives from day to day knowing that, because very few, none of us have that kind of, no one has success like that. You just have, it goes like this, and you just can't get too down with how unsuccessful it can be for quite some significant time. So much as you can't get so carried away when you have the moments I had with Rag and Bone Man. It's there forever and no one can take it away from me, and I'm very proud of it. But I'm always thinking about the next thing that's done, and it's happened, and my God, wow, who knew? I thought he'd be successful. And at first we had to make sure that we got him on the A-list at Radio 1. Of course. And so having 2-inch Punch involved in the production helped tip it, because with his voice it could easily sit in a very MOR, AOR, adult space. And he wasn't a kid when we signed him either. So trying to appeal to a young audience, that was the biggest thing that I had to figure out with him, was how to go, because the minute you go to radio, and if they deem that you're Radio 2 and not Radio 1, it's easier to go left to right, then you can never go from right to left. Fine, okay. You can't end up being that guy and then, oh no, he's actually really quite edgy and hip hop beats and stuff. So we had to be very, very careful and particular about walking this fine line between, contemporary and kind of adult. And we achieved it together, It's difficult.
I suppose that's where, as you mentioned earlier, a couple of times, right, it's about making sure you've got the right songwriters, the right producers, etc., so that you can get this raw talent, but put it into a track that is actually going to be wanted by the different generations, different demographics and things like that. And do you find that kind of causes complications sometimes, outside of obviously the obvious? But like, if you've got, let's take Rag and Bone Man, let's say, for example, you know, he's a specific genre. Do you sometimes ask them to completely change genre to fit that? Or is it trying to find that compromise? You know, where the hell does that work there?
Well, with any artist, I mean, my take on it has always been, you know, he's one of those that kind of falls between the two thought processes I've always had. One is, if you've got a band, they need to find themselves. You need to leave them alone and not be involved in, certainly in the writing of the song capacity.
Yeah.
Then you've got others that, you know, he's a very good writer, Rag and Bone Man. And he kind of likes to bounce off other people, and it's about finding the right people for him to bounce off. And he's really clear about who he is and what he wants to be. And again, you know, and also he's 6'6".
Yeah, really? Yeah. I didn't realise he's that
so,
tall.
you know, I'm like that. I'm like, you've got to be careful how you know. No, he's a gentle giant.
Yeah. Sounds it, mate. Absolutely.
But we would sit down and we would talk about things, and he really knows this. I mean, he's really astute. He's really, he knows what's right for him. He knows what he likes, and he knows what he's comfortable around. And he also is prepared to take a few risks. So with the Calvin Harris collaborations, that was a song that he'd written for the Human album, Giant. And I didn't have enough time because we had so much success with the single, and this was the last track on the album, and we just couldn't get the production right.
Oh, really?
And we all knew it was going to be a single, and this was one of the lucky fates of these things happening. I was under pressure to bring the album forward, which is really rare in these days, just because, you know, it was the success was happening. It was getting bigger. We could, you know, really, you know, make hay while the sun shines, if you like, and there's a certain window that meant that we could go in at 1 and all the rest of it. So I ran out of time, and so we had to put it on the shelf. And I just knew, I'm like, well, this is like amazing, but let's figure out. I would never send it to anyone without his knowledge, and we were still working the rest of the album. But one of the songwriters, one of the two songwriters that he wrote it with, played it to Calvin Harris in LA, and Calvin Harris went absolutely nuts about it. Anyway, it sort of started, you know, obviously Rory was such a big thing at the time, and this song we knew was a hit. We knew it was a hit. We got it right. It was a hit. I just couldn't get it in time.
Yeah.
And anyway, this demo appeared, and so Rory, Rag and Bone, blamed me. He said, because Calvin signed to Columbia. And I don't know anything about this, mate. I mean, you know, because he didn't like dance music at the time, and it took him a little while to get over the fact that I didn't do it, and I didn't know who did it, so it kind of looked like I did. Anyway, it's like everything takes Calvin Harris a long time, fortunately. So it took him a long time to finish the track, and by the time he finished the track, everyone had mellowed a little. Yeah. And what, you know, rightly, this is Rory's music, Rory's song. You know, nobody should be doing that. But it was the thing turned out really well in the end. Amazing. But I would always be really respectful to any artist, particularly Rory. And it's sacred to them, and you just don't go and do those kind of things. But I'm glad that somebody did that, and so is he now, you know. And it took him a little minute to like dance music, for instance. But that's also shown him that things that maybe he didn't used to think were appropriate to him, once somebody like Calvin's got hold of it, because he didn't really change it, he didn't speed his voice up too much. Rory re-sang the vocal because he needed to make it fit properly. But by that point, he could see, well, this is kind of like, this just sounds like a really great version of my song, my demo.
I love that, yeah.
But sometimes it takes that for artists to see it. They're like...
Well, I suppose that comes down to a good producer as well, right? Is actually taking the true essence of a track and just giving it their own flair, but, you know, still keeping that sort of kind of raw emotion in it. And I suppose that's what kind of created that gateway for Rory in that sense, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And for him to see, you know, but the reaction live to that, like Human, you know, it's a big highlight for him. And you know, he won't mind me saying, it took him a little while to see that dance music, you know, I mean, dance music, and Calvin Harris is strictly speaking dance music. He like you say, he's a world-class producer. And he took that and made it world-class. And that's what he does. And you give Calvin Harris a no-brainer of a song, and everybody's laughing.
Yeah.
Because those songs don't grow on. They don't. I mean,
No, of course.
it's as hard for Calvin as it is for any of us to find songs like that are just ready for you.
Absolutely.
You know, he's very skilled at doing that, at finding them, but it's hard. You know, we knew we had this song, and I'm just glad that that's how it happened, and I'm glad that Rory now, you know, he embraces pretty much anything. You know, if he feels it's right for him. But he understands the core value of who he is and what works. I mean, he's got, you know, just the greatest voice, really.
I suppose with a relationship like that as well, right, it's something you grow together. He gets more trust in you, and I suppose then becomes a little bit more open to your suggestions. Do you have a little bit more leeway with him now, or is he still like, right, I know what is me? And he's still... Yeah, he's very open to my suggestions, and you know, maybe one in every 15 is appropriate or is right. I mean, I'm a big believer for trying things you don't know until you try. Fair. But once somebody's got to a certain level, they don't want to be doing that, and I certainly wouldn't want to be doing it. You know, it's when they're new, and you get them on the, you know, on the mouse wheel of writing sessions. You know, and they could just go, like, I've just had 4 sessions this week, and it's just enough. But I'm like, you have to kiss a load of frogs to find the prince, right? But there's a limit to how many frogs somebody... You're going to get chapped lips, let's be honest.
Want to kiss, you know, and like I say, it's not me that sits in the room.
Yeah, of course.
But Rory's great like that. And what you don't want, the worst thing in the world is to have really compliant artists.
Fair.
Right?
Okay.
And I say to people when they're mine, I'm like, listen, you know, he didn't call me for 4 months after this giant malarkey because he thought I'd sent the song. You just got to ride these things through. But what you don't want is an artist that just agrees or just is compliant, does everything that the record company wants. They know if it's not them, it's just going to it's going to be pointless. So
it's a difficult one though, right, as well, because you think, let's say, you are the compliant artist. You've just been given your big break with a big label like Columbia. You know, there's going to be a little bit of like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's imposter syndrome as well.
Imposter, I see what you mean, yeah.
So like they're going to be like, you know, shit, this could be my only job. Do everything they say. Don't fuck it up. You know, don't do this. You know, so actually, you know, as nasty as it is for potentially an A&R because you want their honesty, you want their soul and their emotion involved in what they're doing. But actually, if they're just like, this could be my big break, do everything that they ask me to. You know, there's a bit of a disconnect there, right?
Maybe. I mean, I think again. Because he was slightly older when we signed him, and the genuine realness that he is him, and how hard he found it to drag himself away. You know, he's never been motivated by the money. I say he chose us ahead of lots of money because we'd got to the point where we'd made him feel at home.
Good.
And I think that rather than him go, Christ, this is my opportunity, I think it freaked him out a little bit.
Yeah, fair.
I think he got bored of singing Human a million times everywhere he went. I think it actually because you know, I mean,
stardom isn't for everyone, right?
But I think the ambition. What is ambition? How do you? A lot of people look at ambition now, I suppose, and it's like, well, just make as much money as you can, because that's a measure of how successful you've been. I think with Rory, I never saw in him anyone that necessarily wanted to be a star. He just wanted to make great music. And the byproduct of making the best music you can possibly make, and a song like Human, is that, like I said earlier, you know, those songs find a way. It took us a little while, but when it found its way, it became... And, you know, every time he goes down the street, I'm only human, people at his face. You know, and it's hard for him to just disappear into a quiet life. You know, every time he goes out, he's so identical. And they're the things that really matter. The things that really matter are his voice is like no one else's. He looks like no one else. There's a uniqueness and a USP, which I always look for in artists, because otherwise, it doesn't matter how well you sing, there's always someone that's done it a little bit better. So try and find your own your own lane. So I don't think he was ever really motivated by it. Quite the opposite. I think it kind of freaked him out a little bit. And luckily, he's very steady about it. You know, he wants success, but that was just too much too soon, almost. You know,
so this is actually saying there's different measures of that success for them as well.
how do you measure it? You know, he measures it now the right way. You know, he knows when he's made the right record, he's made the wrong record, and it's really difficult now to keep expecting that you're going to have the same, you know, right human part 2. I mean, your human part 1's happened. What's the point? Mm-hmm. You know, we'll leave that to someone else.
Yeah.
You know, there's no point.
Yeah.
I got loads of songs sent to me actually, and you know, while he was still on the radio and it was still climbing the charts, and I'm like, 2 or 3 of them sounded exactly like Human, only not as good.
Really?
And I'm like, well, I've already got them. Why don't
Yeah. I don't want something the same.
What is the point? Well, I'm going to play that to him and he's going to laugh at me.
Yeah, fair.
So, but we've got that already, but only better.
Yeah.
So I hate that sort of retreading of old ground. He did a record in Nashville to follow it up, and he did it in lockdown, and it kind of went against the commercial grain. He had Pink do a duet with him, which I thought was beautiful.
That's amazing. Pink, what a phenomenal artist.
And and the song, you know, and she loved it, and you know, so it's a different level of ambition, and he achieved something with. I'm very proud of that record, and we literally made it in no time. He got chucked out of Nashville the minute they did the lockdowns, and so he had to do like 12 master vocals in like a week.
No way.
Yeah, because the studio was shutting down, and that was the end of it. So,
Wow.
but he can, you know, and so everything's done for a reason and a period in time, and you know, some people don't really want to listen. I do. Being that's what I'm paid to do. Right? I need to do. I'd have a human part 2, but I wouldn't really. But you know what I mean. Of course. But who knows what that might be? And you can't second guess anymore either. Who really knows what a hit is?
Yeah, fair.
It's very hard to judge. You know, we can't control the trajectory anymore. I was say earlier, Columbia are doing that extremely well with Sky Newman. I mean, that's like I say, it's an outlier really, but it's very difficult. You know, we're reliant wholly on these kids and them sharing it. Like my son knows about this, and he's like, "This is what all my friends are looking at. These tiny little clips of the things you were talking about."
Yeah, of course.
And it could be gone the next day, or it might.
Absolutely.
You know, very rarely it finds traction.
Well, one of the things you were saying earlier, and actually it's kind of coming away from Rag and Bone Man as a whole, but more just looking at you managing the between the label and the artist. Obviously, you mentioned earlier about all the pressure you get from the top down about either releasing quickly or getting a hit or doing this, and as you say, even things like looking at a human part 2, because of how successful human was. You know, the pressure from the top going, well, we want another one of those. But then also you're then managing the life, the mentality, the mindset and everything of the artist. You know, how do you sort of kind of find that compromise? How do you mediate something like that when you've got all this pressure but you really want to stop it from rolling downhill?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I've always the tightrope, right, with the big old sticks. Where I've always said there's people walking across buildings, and you think, how the hell have they not fallen? And you can see the fear in their face. And it is a bit like that, really. I mean, luckily I've known it all my life, where you have a responsibility to, you know, these people pay you to do a job, right? It's not a hobby. And I always say sometimes to any younger members of our A&R team or anyone that care. Here, really, sometimes you have to park your taste at the door as well, because it's not a hobby. Because we could all go a bit esoteric, you know. It's all about the song, and it's all about the voice, and it's all about the presence, and it's all about, you know, the talent of the artist. But it's still you know, if you've got taste, then you bring a modicum in, but it's those people that go off on a wild one and sign things that, you know, are just that they just like, you know, that have absolutely, because they think that the arbiters of taste, and you've got to be careful that you don't allow that to take over who you are, to make the wrong judgments, because you have a responsibility to the people that have employed you. But partly that responsibility is only any good if the artist is absolutely locked in and focused and believes in him or herself and trusts in what it is that we're bringing to the table. Because the minute that you go in and appear to bring that stress with you, and appear to be panicked or saying something, a suggestion for all the wrong reasons, they see right through you, and you lose that that relationship that you've worked so hard to build. You can lose it in a second because they see right through. They see you for all for not being the person that you presented to them. And with artists, it's almost impossible, real artists, to get that back. Because they're like, well, it's too dangerous for me to think that all the things that you said and all the things that we've done,
twice shy, right?
Yeah, mean anything at all. So you're constantly, it's like spinning plates a little bit, because I want success.
Absolutely.
But I know I'm not going to get that success from them if I approach it the wrong way.
Well, was there something you were saying earlier about obviously the roller coaster of the successes and failures? Even if you, let's say you're on a bit of a drought, you're not doing too well. That desperation, the anxiety, it's all building up in you, and you've got to kind of fence it all off and be like, right, okay, I've got my job. This is how I act. Do you have any tips for people out there that may be struggling with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always harder for the people that are close to you because you take all your insecurities home.
It's very emotional, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, as long as I've been doing it, and as much as I'm aware of, it's the loneliest job in the world as well. You sign an artist, and you've got all of the company are there, chinking the champagne at the signing ceremony, and the lawyer and the manager, and everybody's there, and everybody's really excited. And all of a sudden, you're left with the artist, and it's you, and that's all gone, and it's down to you, and the pressure falls on your shoulders, and whatever anybody might think about A&R people, it takes some balls and some courage to ride through those hard times.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a lot of people get the blame. The first person that gets the blame is the A&R man. They're shit. And it's tough. And I look at the young kids, and they're riddled with all of the insecurities that I've lived with all my life, and it's just how you manage them. And like I say, you can. It's usually those closest to you that bear the brunt of it. Because you're going, what does this mean? And you end up seeing things that aren't there, or imagining that you're about to get fired, or this is happening. Why is that? So all of this stuff that you're making up in your head has to come out somewhere, and it's a really, really difficult place to be. It's a lonely place to be. But the ones that don't really give too much of a fuck about that are the ones that are going to be all right.
I love that. Well, actually, that's probably a good transition to just some general advice. So let's say, someone out there is coming away from the artist, actually looking at your specific role. Someone loves the idea of A&R. They want to make it their career. What would your advice to them be? What would your advice to them be for someone trying to get in the career, especially in today's age?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting increasingly more difficult because I don't know about all the major labels, but certainly Columbia and Sony per se have their internship. So I have an A&R program that it's amazing, yeah, and we get some really incredible young A&R people. But gone are the days of you being able to kind of like, a friend of a friend of a friend, or just shoehorn somebody in that you think is
when the management are off, just signing someone.
That kind of thing. We're not. So everything has to be done correctly, and thousands of people apply, obviously, because there's a lot of them are actually quite experienced and quite a bit older, and it does surprise me, but shows you how hard it is to get in.
It's crazy.
But some incredible people that we found through the internship, and so everything filters through that. I mean, I would say it's not the only way, of course. That's one way that we find A&R people, but that's how you find young people that are trying to get in, that are getting the first, rung on the ladder, if you like. There are others that might have been, there's a couple of artists they might have found that are really interesting, that they're showing, cutting their teeth, if you like, as an A&R person, by showing, one, that they've got taste, because they've decided, and they've stumbled on this person that they've decided they want to work with, and two, they're doing a good job of it. And again, it's a small industry, I think people talk. So there's an opportunity there for people. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need a lot of money to do that, but of course it means that if you are doing that, then you most definitely need a day job, because it's going to take time.
Yeah, of course.
And some resources, but necessarily need to be funded to do that. Mm-hmm. You just need taste and you need intuition and you need to be able to find these people. So you need to get out there and go to gigs, and you need to listen to the right kind of online radio stations, podcasts, wherever they might be. And once you find somebody, you get close to them, and then you become, by de facto manager or de facto A&R person, you build a relationship with them and they trust you.
Amazing.
And I think those are things that anybody can do. I mean, if it were me now starting out, with the tools at my disposal and being the young man that I was back then, where I was determined to get myself into the Soho clubs DJing, which felt like a kind of closed shop, to be honest. But I just was just not having no. I would look at this and think it's just a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for indie labels. It's a huge opportunity for pretty much anyone. Because your majors are going to sign things that are major leaning. Majors didn't necessarily always just used to do that. They'd sign things that were kind of cool and interesting, but now it's almost exclusively things that can cross over. There are loads of other things that can cross over, but maybe they'll do that after a year or two. Maybe they're just really interesting at the moment. And you need to find those things. Somebody needs to work with those things. There's so much music out there that not everybody can find everything. Majors are good at looking at most of the significant stuff, but there's stuff that would be bubbling beneath the surface. You just need to be hungry and determined and forthright enough to say, well, this is all at my disposal. Let me go and find it. Let me be the one. That's what I would suggest, that if people that are kind of looking for an into a record company, I mean, I got mine after like the second job, and then I had to put my job on the line in order to prove that I could actually do it. And it could have gone one way or the other. Yeah. And I knew that. I know it's 5 minutes, but always 5 minutes from the sack anyway. But it wasn't anybody else that it encouraged. In fact, quite the opposite. I wasn't encouraged to do that at all. So I think knowing that it's very difficult to get in, knowing that it's still, even if you get in, it might not be the right home for you, because record companies are not going to employ you and then say, well, you can just sign whatever you want.
Yeah. As you said earlier, you've got to put your taste at the door, right?
You put your taste at the door, and also what I did at Ireland way back when, you just couldn't do it now. I mean, you just can't. See, people aren't releasing funds to sign something that 23 people haven't signed off on. Yeah. So that just simply couldn't happen. Yeah. But then it's not just about the money, it's about showing that you've got what it takes to do the job. So you don't have to do that within, it's not necessarily the best environs, might not be the record company, the frontline record company. Go to a management company, because they're all looking to source artists all the time. Absolutely. And some of the bigger management companies or some of the smaller ones, or a publishing company, which is where I'm going to. They're incredibly daring and adventurous now, because again, there's rich pickings out there. So, in terms of publishing, there's an awful lot of different ways that that the income stream can benefit you without having to worry about breaking artists. Whereas record companies, are solely focused on breaking an artist. So I would suggest that a myriad of different places you should look at going into, or just doing it yourself online.
Well, I suppose there's the traits that really you need to be passionate about, right? Is that whole sort of crate digging scenario. If you're not actively looking for new music constantly and have a desire to do it, probably isn't the right job.
It's probably not the right job. I did when I was DJing. Same thing, that we would dig really deep, because I was in competition with other DJs as well as record companies, and my lifeblood was having things, and people like, what's that, like the old Northern Soul, the old Northern Soul DJs. I remember, this thing called cover-ups. So they'd have this 7-inch record from America, and they would actually make up a name of the artist, make up an artist name, make up a song title, and stick it on the record, so that other DJs that would be peering like this because they could see the audience going nuts, going crazy.
That's brilliant.
So there's a lot of records now that are really rare Northern Soul records that someone will say on the website, well, this was such and such cover up. It was called blah 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 cover up. Because people are like, so the DJ would say it's that. And then they'd all go off and nobody would know. So he'd be the only person with this record. So, and it kind of reminds me of that, is that you need to delve and kid, listen, there's no one better qualified than this young generation of kids that have literally grown up with a phone attached to their hands, you know.
That's the thing, of things like Shazam and everything makes it so exciting. I mean, even when I DJ, the amount of times you'll be sort of, you know, at the booth like this or whatever, and you play a good track, and the next thing you know, you've got 3 or 4 people peering over just looking at the title track name. It's crazy, right? But I absolutely love that. Just a little sticker, just to
and some of them are like, the cover-ups are, you know, everyone's like, well, we always knew it was that, you know, and so the Northern Soul's that's a really elitist example, because some of these records, there are only 3 or 4 in existence anyway. So the guy was so desperate to be the only person in the world that he threw them off the scent.
I love it.
So I just think that it's all about digging, right? It's all about, you know, me going to a record company even back in the 80s and saying that I really know a lot about it. Can you give me a job? I mean, I knew that wasn't going to happen then. I had to kind of like stumble my way in and lie to get the first job and then do something that I didn't really want to do to get into the second, to do what I wanted to do. And then it's about taking your opportunity. What is it that, I mean, you kind of got to want it that badly that you can't wait for a record company to give you a job.
Fair.
You have to, you know, because my passion was just about the music.
Yeah.
I wanted a record company job because I wanted to make history. But I knew that I'd have to show them. You know, you have to kind of, not that, you know, history is an extreme way of looking at it, but we wanted to change how it was.
Yeah.
You know, and it was all very, early 80s was all very like piano ties, Cuban heels. It was people that we wouldn't let into our clubs. And I'm like, well, we're not letting them into our clubs. So I should be doing their job, you know, because they're not, they don't know what's going on. We don't let them come in. So I think you kind of have to think that way, and you have to think that, you know, the internet for clever people, I mean, it doesn't cost a penny to put a track on Spotify, for instance. It doesn't cost a penny to post something on TikTok or Instagram. And if you're clever, it's all about how creative you can be with that moment. You know, if you that's the way of showing, and it's about getting the music to people, really.
Well, funny if you echoed a point from Sylvia Montello, I guess from a couple of shows ago, and we were talking about how, you know, brand new labels or small independent labels can compete with the advertising of these, you know, big labels with these massive budgets, and the answer was creativity. You know, you don't necessarily have to spend a lot; you just have to be different, be
Christ,
creative.
imagine if we had all of that. I'm older than you by some distance, but imagine if I had all of this back in the days when we started, when I had to buy an SL1210 and I couldn't afford an SL1210 or a mix.
I've got 2 of them in there, mate.
I know. I have,
you can borrow them.
I remember. But the fact of the matter is, they've got software. I mean, everything's in this box. I mean, everything.
It's nuts.
It's. I mean, and it doesn't cost anything. And cost was never an obstacle even back then. We just thought above it. You know, we thought we'll deal with it somehow. We'll put a club night on and we'll get so-and-so to come down. We used to get artists to come down, and we just, on the pretense of it being something that it was, I don't know, we were just ways of promoting club nights. And we'd all split the makings, and it would go towards whatever it was we had to buy. Now you don't really have to buy anything to be creative.
Just it's all up there. So is there any like scenario that really stands out for you as a bit of a fond memory of you know, a creative element that you did, whether it be for club promotion, whether it was for launching a track or an artist? Is there anything that really stands out to you as a bit of a highlight?
Yeah, a couple of things, I think.
I see the little smile on your face as you're thinking back. That's beautiful.
Yeah, because they were things that I'd always, you know, it was always I guess the same is true today. In order to get noticed with something, like Misha Parrish, she'd already had a big album, then we were working on the second album, and you still have to inject excitement into artists. And she'd been pulled out of the crowd at a Prince concert at the Camden Palace by him.
Oh, wow.
And she went on stage and sang with him when she was 17. And she supported Ray Charles in Paris, and all this stuff was amazing. And I just thought, what I need is something, white label promo versions. And all DJs loved them, but they were all the same. You needed something. So I had a cassette of Prince's demo of the song that he wrote for her that she ended up recording for her next single. So Prince has sent me a cassette. So I had this cassette. And I accidentally, on purpose, mastered it and put it on the promo 12-inch for her single. And everybody started talking about it. It's like, there's a Prince demo. And in those days, a Prince demo was where people were running around. It's worth about 200 quid now. And we got, Warner Brothers got onto us, and we had to destroy and all of it became kind of press-worthy. And it didn't turn into a hit. But I remember thinking, there's another one of those, just ask for forgiveness. We're not going to ring up and say, can I just take this cassette, take it into the mastering suite? It sounded like a shitty cassette, a really bad. I mean, it was a Prince demo, so it was brilliant. And there were only so what happened was we publicly kind of had to destroy the rest of the stock, and so there was only 125 in existence. And because I love that Northern Soul, if you can get one of only 10 things that exist in the world, then that's really special. Amazing. So all the DJs were like, "Oh my God, have you got that?" They were talking about it, even if they weren't playing it, and that was pretty good. And then we signed NWA, and they had a track on their album called "Fuck the Police." Yep. And we brought it to the police's attention, and then they raided our warehouse in Blackburn, and it was the headline news on the BBC, and we were like, you can't buy that kind of publicity,
mate. Yeah, mate, that's
like a
amazing.
rap band, and it's the first item on the news. Was American rap band has the police seize all their stock. Because it was, because I remember thinking this album's like never mind the bollocks, right? It's like a punk record. It's like a punk record, a hip hop, the hip hop punk album. And we kind of needed and wanted the way that Johnny Rotten would create they'd swear on TV or whatever it would be. We kind of had to get somebody to do something that would create the same kind of noise. So the police did that for us.
That's it, mate.
And it was like impounded our stock.
Literally stuff you couldn't write. You couldn't put that together.
It was
God's
just
gift.
Everybody knew them all of a sudden. It was in everybody's front rooms. Because in those days, TV of any kind was significant. I mean, it's totally insignificant now because people are looking at different bits of news.
Terrestrial doesn't even exist anymore. As good as, right?
But in those days, if you could get on the news, certainly with something like that wasn't really necessarily in the commercial sphere. So it's not like we could get played on Radio 1. I mean, they were never, it wasn't. It wasn't like it was in everybody's front rooms. And having the warehouse impounded by the police and all the stock, how did they say, confiscated, made the news. And so, that's
fantastic.
You have to think like that sometimes. Sometimes it's like we can have the best marketing people in the world, but what's going to capture someone's imagination is something that's kind of completely at odds with the job that you're doing. Like putting a billboard up in Shepherd's Bush Green. It's ways of getting it to people that wouldn't normally get anywhere near it. Really.
Fantastic. Oh, I love that. So coming away from that then, are there actually any, we spoke about a bit of a highlight there, and obviously you've gone through a whole array of artists, which to be fair is just, for me as a lover of pretty much every single group artist that you've mentioned today. I just said Run DMC, I've even got them in the background. I've got Prince up there, I've got Bowie there, I've got, honestly, I'm a big, I've probably got one of the most diverse loves of music, depending on my day, the mood, the time, everything like that. But is there any artist that you haven't but would have loved to have signed or licensed?
Yeah, I mean, I had Massive Attack. They were called the Wild Bunch, and they were signed to Fourth and Broadway. And I knew them from Bristol, and I ended up signing Tricky, who was part of that whole scene. But they
had all the Maxine Key release and everything like that, right?
That was one of my proudest moments, really. But
amazing.
I mean, and sitting with them, and they were just like, they just didn't seem interested in pursuing. And we did like a 3-single deal or something, and then within 10 minutes they'd kind of sort of split up, and one faction had become Massive Attack, and the other Nelly Hooper went and joined Jazzy B, and they created Soul to Soul. So those two were both. I had them both sitting here, and I didn't get them, and that would have been. Well, that's a big, not regret, because you can't regret, but yeah, there's loads of things that I would love to have signed. Of course, the Verve, Michael Kiwanuka. I don't know. I mean, Christ, yeah. I mean, so much stuff that you just. I mean, as a fan, I've admired. I'm like, it always drove me on to try and find something as good, or and it's hard. It's hard. Those things, some of them define generations. Some of these things, but you have to aspire. Yeah. Prince. My God, I'm just too young. Yeah. Prince was. It was 1976, I think, his first album. But yeah, I mean, but these days, some of the A&R people sign things that are incredible, but they just don't even really know that that's what they're sitting on, because. Like I said,
you've got, I suppose, a similar scenario, right? You go back to the 80s, early 90s, when, as you say, you were working with the likes of NWA, and obviously Ice Cube separately, and people like that. And look how they've defined a genre of music, what they've done for even the black community and things like that, just what they've gone on to produce. Like, wow, who would have dreamed of it when you first started working with them? So what you're saying is true for you as well, in many, many ways, right? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's true. It's more true now than probably ever before, because we at least, most of the people that my contemporaries were given a fair crack of the whip with an artist. I mean, it was very rare that, unless you did a singles deal and you were licensing or something, of course, but it was very rare that you didn't actually give it a bit of a go. And now, it's hard to find out. It's easier in America. They tend to develop because they can afford to, in the sense that niche audiences in America are sizable enough still.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore. We don't have. I mean, even soul. When I was doing Fourth and Broadway, the big stadium acts really were like Freddie Jackson, Alexander O'Neill, Anita Baker. They were the ones that were sending out, like I say, stadium. I mean, arenas, and so they were sending out Wembley, and so they were the big act. Now, soul is beyond being even. I mean, it just doesn't. It barely exists in terms of how substantial the audience is. If you were a pure soul act, it's tiny, and it shouldn't be. Reggae, tiny, and it shouldn't be. Even hip hop, it's kind of.
Do you think that's also to do with the generation as music tastes? Yeah. Obviously, you guys, I think you mentioned earlier, you're getting a lot of genres that themselves are fracturing and creating a lot of sub-genres. So actually, rather than just having like a load of people focused on this, you've got a few here, but all under a very similar umbrella.
Yeah, and none of it is substantial enough. And again, coupled with the world that we live in, where music is not the only game in town. Do you know what I mean? It used to be that music was the cool thing that you would love, the only thing, the coolest thing that you could possibly do. And now it's competing. I don't know how far down the rung of the ladder it is for these kids that have got all of this stuff that is mind-blowing on their phones, and music is, the background to a meme, or, it's occasionally it's a thing that they'll share, but it's about the track and the association of the track with the image rather than the artist.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's just become another thing that's on the phone that helps them to build their profiles, really.
Yeah. So what would you say the biggest, of your 40-odd year career, what would you say the biggest lesson you've learned over them years is? I know that's a very broad question. What's the thing that you sort of kind of really reflect back on that sometimes and go, right, okay, I'm glad I learned that?
Never doubt yourself, never give up, really, because I've been wrong so many times. And if you've been doing it as long as I've been doing it, you're bound to have examples of things that are,
naturally,
are good.
Of course,
because someone's given you the opportunity to stick around, or you've just gone, you know what, I'm not going to be going anywhere. I'm gonna stick around. So I think it's determination and persistence. Because I mean, my mum said to me when I was 23, you got to get yourself a proper job. And here I am.
Thanks, Mum.
And I think she still thinks that I need to get a proper job. And it never used to seem like a proper job. And I always said to her, no, it is. It's a proper job. It's just that a lot of people don't want to do it. And she said, what do you do? And I'm like, A&R. And I'm like, it means artist and repertoire, but I still don't know what that means. But that's what it means. So yeah, she was right. I mean, but now it's become a thing. People can go to music college and learn how to be A&R, learn how to be a lawyer, learn how to be a producer. You can't learn how to be an A&R person, I don't think, because if you apply all of the logic of if you're a great songwriter, therefore you can you will be someone that will has the tools to be able to talk to artists and make the very best records and songs. But sometimes somebody like that is too highbrow. You've got to think like, I always think like I'm that 16-year-old kid that just got played this record in a record shop in London, and the feeling of excitement that it gave me, and not being able to really identify what it was, or not even really give a shit.
Yeah.
Because if it hits me there, it's not really necessarily going to work. It has to hit me here. Yeah. Because that to me is the minute you think it, is the minute you get it wrong. And the examples of people that have been put in inflated positions within A&R creative roles here or in America, funnily enough, the ones that, so-and-so's they've written this song and that song, it hasn't worked because they're not the punter.
Yeah.
I come with, I think, with a member of the public's taste, a punter taste, and the enthusiasm around it. And funnily enough, when I've struggled to go home of a night and play my own music, the music I'm making, usually I got it wrong.
Yeah, fair.
So I think you just need to identify what that skill is that you've got. And my skill's always just been that pure excitement. I do understand certain things by being a DJ. I understand very cleverly how to get a record off really quickly, without it sounding like you're going like that. When it's just gone horribly wrong and you've lost the floor. So you have to apply those things that you don't think are necessarily relevant, but I know when, I hear a track and I'm like, that's, it's bells and whistles to disguise the fact that the song's not very good. Yeah. Clever production techniques. It takes you making a lot of mistakes to learn things like that. Although there are a lot of very wise A&R people now that I don't know how they haven't made those mistakes that I made. But then I guess we made them for them.
I suppose also mistakes is what makes you who you are, and it makes you the better person. Right? As you say, you know what you're looking out for. As it's not always going to be perfect, but
it's just spending a lot of money. I mean, when you make records, I made records with Rod Temperton and Nada Michael Walden. I did that. I just like was a kid in a sweet shop. Misha's second record, and I said, "You're going to go and no, it was a third record actually." And I've got Rod Temperton, and he wants to work with you, and he wrote "Rock With You," and what else do you need to know?
Done.
I mean, and Nada Michael Walden, and he "I Love Your Smile." That the week I managed to secure him, and that was all over the brilliant song.
Amazing.
And he'd done Whitney, and he'd done Aretha Franklin, and like, what else do you need to know? And, you know, it was LA and it was San Francisco. And, you know, and the thing about Nada Michael Walden, he was showy and he was used to very big budgets.
Yeah.
Like American budgets. And he had me. And I'm like, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
I will spend it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm spending her money, but we were spending it together.
Yeah.
But it's not her money until it worked. But, you know, there's a very grey area there. But, yeah, it was kind of like we were living that penthouse thing. We were making records, and it was like, you want to get a 20-piece string section, just do it.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I would never advise anyone to go down that road, and unless it's really appropriate that you do. But yeah, I mean, and the pressure of spending all that money and it doesn't do what it should do means that, again, you're in the firing line. So
absolutely, yeah, it's always about the ROI. So coming on to the last segment then, buddy, and thank you so much for today. Honestly, it's been really, really wonderful hearing all of these stories, and I'm talking some of the artists you mentioned. Honestly, I'm in genuine awe. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
But so obviously we were very aware, and you mentioned it already. Obviously, you recently left Columbia.
Yeah.
What is next for Julian Palmer?
Well, I've been I'm taking up a position at Universal Music Publishing.
Amazing. Congratulations.
But I mean, really, really. I'm completely an area of the industry that I'm kind of slightly dipping my toes in, but not. I'm intrigued by and absolutely adore the people that I'm going to be working for there. David Gray, who's come over from the American office and brings all of that kind of that drive and determination and American work ethic with him. He's got an incredible ear for great songs, and he's had huge success both in records and in publishing as well. So, you know, I can only learn from him. I need to learn what publishing's all about, really. And Pete Simmons, who's their head of A&R, who may well be the most sought after young A&R person in the country. Really? Bar none, and every record company would die to have him working for them. And he's rather astutely, I think, identified that that publishing allows him freedom to express his taste and his instinct and his intuition the way that record companies might just flatten and dampen and not take advantage of, perhaps. Very, very wise for someone so young, and so I can't wait. And going to be helping to look after their more established songwriters and artists. From Cat Stevens to Paul Weller to Norman Cook, Bernard Butler and Johnny Marr, and the list is endless. And some of them I've known anyway. I've known Paul Weller and Norman Cook through having worked with them at Fulton Broadway and Ireland, respectively, and a lot of them I know just because I'm old, And so I'm really excited by it, and also an opportunity for me to sit in their A&R meetings, and because I'm coming from having sat in Columbia's A&R meetings, and
so
they'll be very similar. So I'm still aware of what's happening enough, and I'm still very anxious that I don't lose touch with what's going on TikTok, I suppose.
So look, for you, it's still a career, right? Still like you've got
a
long time ahead of you yet, my friend, and I'm looking forward to some new finds from you, because you clearly know your stuff.
It's really, really, really exciting time, and I feel like that kid that I said. That's the feeling that you need to retain that youthful excitement around music. And I've kind of got that back a little bit because I've got this exciting new challenge in a different area.
A fancy new suit and a tie
for
your first day of work.
I don't know about that. I'll be
get your mum to take a picture.
Yeah, proper job. And it's actually my first proper job, I suppose.
Amazing. Yeah,
Mum, I've got it. A proper job.
Amazing.
So it's only 42 years later.
Finally done it. So, unless there's anything else you think we've missed or you want to cover, I have one last question. And it's a question I ask all my guests, and I love it. Is let's say in 100 years' time, people look back and they see the name Julian Palmer, what do you want to be remembered for personally? What's the legacy you want to leave behind?
You made good music with people.
Amazing.
You know, that's it, really.
Nice and simple.
Because good music is everything. Doesn't necessarily mean it's all successful. And that's what I think, you know, the lesson that you learn is you can have success with bad music.
Yeah, fair.
But I'd rather be remembered
just
having been involved with good music, yeah.
Love it. Good answer. Well, Julian, that's the same. Unless there's anything else you want to cover.
No,
Thank
that's
you
great.
very much.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
Cheers.
loved it. Thank you very much, mate.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Beats Learning. Huge thanks to Julian for sharing decades of wisdom, wild A&R stories, and a real masterclass in how great music gets discovered and developed. If you enjoyed today's show, hit like, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who's passionate about music or chasing a career in the industry. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Davenport, and I'll catch you next time on Beats Learning.